Tonight's learning is sponsored by Avrohom in honor of Gedalia, who helped him from his find his ultimate happiness, and by Jamina Oazman, his beautiful Kala, who is that happiness. DJ Acquisitions, Isachar Zvulun sponsorship for the Refuah Shalem of Menachem Mendel Ben Sorabatya and the Voyerfega Bat Rezo. Okay, so before we even get into this lecture and even the introduction to this lecture, I want to share with you that this lecture is going to contain a plethora of fundamental Kabbalistic and Hasidic teachings. And we're going to be moving at a rapid speed. Each one of these introductions probably should have more than one lecture. I mean, at least that's the way it was taught to me over the years. So I am suggesting that you receive the notes to this class in order to be able to read them at your own pace as well. And you can receive them by emailing me at thejewishmind@icloud.com. Put in the subject line a request for the class notes. Additionally, if you have any questions or simply need more clarification, you can email your questions to me as well at thejewishmind@icloud.com. That's for all you present, all you out there on live feed. My email, thejewishmind@icloud.com, so that you can look over these notes. You know, I type up everything, and you'll be able to then go over each one of these fundamental concepts of Hasidus. Okay? Okay. Ooh, yeah. So, let's talk about this. What is this class about? You know that in the Jewish mind, what are we focused on? We're focused on diving into the timeless teachings of Judaism in order to find practical solutions to modern day issues. The Torah is a book of life. It's not an ancient constitution. And therefore, we have to always be able to live with the times and find in today's modern days and modern issues solutions from the Torah. If not, it becomes irrelevant. And the Torah is never irrelevant. So that's what we're focused on. So what is the modern issues we want to talk about? So I'm going to introduce to you 2 secrets to financial success. And what is those 2 secrets? Number 1, small business guru by the name of Michael Gerber. He wrote a book called E-Myth Revisited. In his book, E-Myth Revisited, he lays out that the reason why most small businesses do not survive 5 years. He did a study of how many survive 2 years and how many survive 5 years. There's a very, very low, I think it's almost single-digit percentage of small businesses that actually survive 5 years. And he says the reason for that is because people open up a business, and instead of working on their business, they're working in their business. To be an entrepreneur, you cannot be working in your business. You need to be working on your business. So let's understand what this means. So he goes ahead and he creates his whole book around a story of I believe her name is Miss Sue, that was a phenomenal baker. And she used to bake for a certain bakery. And her family and her friends and her customers would tell her, why are you baking for his bakery? You should open up your own bakery. Why are you making money for the other person? Make money for yourself. Finally, she actually opened up her own bakery, and life became a disaster. Why did it become a disaster? Because all of a sudden, she was baking, she was handling the bills, she was taking care of the maintenance, she was taking care of the cleanup, and all the other very difficult stuff that you need to do when you're running your own business. And basically what Sue was doing was, she was working in her business, so the only thing that changed is that she lost peace of mind and fringe benefits. When you're really working for someone else's business, when the door closes, you go and you sleep peacefully. The next morning you come back. When you own a business, it's 24/7. So when you're working in the business you're owning, you have the worst of both worlds. You're working in your business rather on your business. So let me say it to you in different words. Sue the baker, her product was baked goods. Sue the entrepreneur, her product was not baked goods. Her product was the bakery, which could turn into a franchise, or a corporation that's sold on the stock exchange. That's the difference between working in your business or on your business. When you're working in your business as a baker, your main product is baked goods. When you're working on your business as an entrepreneur, your main product is your company. That's the difference between working in and working on. Another secret. Napoleon Hill, author of most famous book he has many books. One of the most famous books he has is Think and Grow Rich. So Napoleon Hill was commissioned by Andrew Carnegie, and he spent 10 years in research to actually study the secret of successful people. After a decade of research, he found the commonality between all successful people is that they must first be connected with a higher intelligence. That's what he calls it. He says that in order to be successful, you have to have what they call creative imagination, which comes to you through higher intelligence. And that is the only way to really become highly successful. Let me read it to you in his words, okay? The faculty of creative imagination is a direct link between the finite mind of man and infinite intelligence. All so-called revelations referred to in the realm of religion and all discoveries of basic or new principles in the field of invention takes place through the faculty of creative imagination. So now you know the modern issue we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the two secrets of success. Real success. The secrets that all successful people have in common. So it's not one individual, this works, another individual, this works. These are universal secrets of success that one is to embrace if they truly are to be able to reach and maintain success. Okay, now, to us, there's a teaching of the Rebbe, a mimer that the Rebbe delivered in 1966 on this Shabbat, and it talks about the difference between Aaron, the high priest's inauguration of kindling the menorah in the tabernacle, versus the offerings, the sacrifices on the altar of the 12 Nisiim, the 12 princes of the 12 tribes, which each one brought for their tribe. By understanding the concept of this teaching of the Rebbe, we will be able to understand the mystical depths and the practical path to these two secrets of certain success. Okay? Okay, let's get into introductions. As I told you, the larger part of this class is going to be introductions. Once we lay out the introductions, sewing them together will be quite quickly. Okay? So, let me first go ahead and read you the list of the introductions that we need to understand before we enter into a spiritual dimension of understanding these secrets of Gerber and Hill. Number one, the difference between the spiritual realms of Atzilut and Bria. Two Hebrew words, we'll talk about it. Next, the Sea of King Solomon. The third, the difference between our people being divided into 12 tribes and our people being defined by the 7 branches of the menorah. Lastly, the difference between the sun and the moon in their original and latter states. Okay? Let's go. Number one, an introduction to all introductions. In the world of Kabbalah and Hasidus, the entire universe, from the point of creator to final creation, is divided in 3 categories. One is called Olamot Lamala Mahatzilut, which is before the world of Atzilut. We'll define Atzilut. The second category is the world of Atzilut. And the third category is the world's post-Atzilut, known as the acronym Biyah. Biyah is 3 letters, Bet, Yud, Ayin, which stands for the 3 worlds post-Atzilut, which is Bria, means creation, Yitzirah, which means formation, Asiyah, which means action. And basically, these are 3 parts of one category which defines the development of separation and identity of self and ego. Now, what we are going to work on in this class is not category A. We're going to talk about the world of Atzilut. We're going to talk about the category of Bria by focusing only on the first stage, which is called Bria, creation, ex nihilo, something from nothing. Okay? So now that we understand that, let's go ahead and dive into the actual introductions. So let's start with the Yam Shel Shlomo. For those of you who have studied the Book of Kings, the Book of Kings talks about King Solomon's temple. As you know, his father, King David, prepared the temple, but God told King David that your hands are filled with blood, and therefore while you have prepared all the necessary items and plans for the actual temple, it will be your son, King Solomon, from the word Shlomo, from the word Shalom, who's of peace, that will actually build the Holy Temple. So in the Book of Kings, we actually have a very beautiful description of the Holy Temple built by King Solomon. However, there's another detailed description of Yam Shel Shlomo. If you want to read all the magnificent details of this bath, this Yam, this sea of King Solomon, look into Kings 1, chapter 7. What I'm going to share with you is only one verse, verse number 44. That's all that's important for our lecture tonight. In verse 44, what does he say? He says that the sea was on top of 12 oxen. So you had 12 copper oxen, right? There was 3 to each side. 3 times 4 is 12. On top of that, there was this huge, big tub of whatever it was, which in there was the sea of King Solomon. Now, the fact that this is so explained in detail in one of our books of prophets, Kabbalah and Hasidus see this as a very important teaching. It carries some very important mystical message to us. If not, the prophets would not be writing verses about this bath, the sea of King Solomon. There's many stuff that were handed down in the oral tradition. Why would they take verses of the written Torah and tell it to us? Obviously, this is a huge issue. So the question is, why number 12? Why do you have 12 oxen? Number 2, why were they oxen? Why weren't they beautiful bronze trees? Why from the animal kingdom? Those are 2 questions that I want you to know about, and we're going to learn out from this a lot. Okay? So let's talk about this. The world of Bria. Bria is creation ex nihilo. So I want to just give you a general statement. The world of Atzilut represents oneness and God conscious. The word Atzilut actually has 2 meanings. One comes from the word etzel, close to. That means this world is very close to divinity. The other word for Atzilut means vayatzil. When God told Moses, I'm going to bring forth from your prophecy and place it on the 70 elders. So it's not a new creation. It's actually taking from the level of prophecy and divinity of Moses and bringing it forth to them. So too, the world of Atzilut is actually, and we'll talk about it more in a moment, it's actually just bringing forth the divinity and oneness of God. From above Atzilut, the infinite light. Yes. Now, when we talk about the word Bria, you should just know, and I mentioned this in a previous lecture here, that the Ramban Nachmanides, he writes that on the second word of the Torah, Bereshis bara, he says that the only word in Hebrew, in the holy tongue, which is true definition of creating ex nihilo, something out of nothing, is only from the word Bria, bara. So this concept of ex nihilo is the manifestation of a very simple verse according to Kabbalah in Genesis. In Genesis it talks about after God created everything, it actually explains in chapter 2 how it went, and he talks about Eden, he talks about the Garden of Eden, and he talks about V'nahar yatsa me'eden, and a river came forth, flowed out of Eden, and then it goes on to say, Umesham yipared, and from there it's separated. In Kabbalah, that's very big. Because, yes, correct, into 4 rivers, correct. But the point I want to talk about is Eden, it's not about going out, it's still within divine God conscience, number 1. And number 2, it doesn't tolerate or give room for an identity of separation. Separation begins post-Atzilut, beginning of Bria. So that notion that a creation can think that I am separated from God, attached only by a life support system, does not exist in the world of Atzilut. There is no me and God and I'm attached by some life support system. Rather, I am nothing more than a piece of God. That notion of separation, I am I, and God is God, all begins in that verse of Genesis, which on a Kabbalistic level talks about where Bria is outside of Atzilut. However, what we did say was that the life force, which would later separate, came from where? It did come from Eden. It did come from Atzilut. So we need to understand this. So how are we going to understand this is very simple. Let's go ahead and line up Atzilut simply for this lecture in just a couple of words. Okay? In Atzilut, there are 10 emanations, known in Kabbalah as Sfirot. These 10 emanations are broken into 2 categories. Category number 1 is the 3 intellects, namely wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, which, by the way, is the acronym for Chabad, Chachma Bina Dat. Then the second category is the 7 emotions. Okay? Now, the 7 emotions divides into 2 categories. The first category is the 6 male emotions. The second category is the 7th emotion, which is the feminine mystique of Malchut, kingship. Now let's talk about that for a moment. What happens with kingship? Kingship, that 10th Sphira, is a very peculiar emanation, unlike any of its predecessors. Because the job of Malchut, kingship, is to absorb all of these 6 male emanations above it, and then to descend and become the crown and source of the lower world. So the Malchut, the 10th emanation of the world of Atzilut, then descends and becomes the crown of Bria. So when the process works, what's actually happening is that Bria is living off the river which comes forth from Eden. What is the river? The river is the 6 male emanations absorbed by Malchut and then brought down into Bria. That's what that verse means on a Kabbalistic level. Now let's define this. You have 6 male emotions, right? That's what we just said. By the way, just that you know what they are. Chesed, Gvura, Tferas, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, which means kindness, strength, splendor, victory, gratitude, acknowledgement, gratitude, and foundation. How that translates into the human soul, we'll talk about. We have spoken about it in the past. We will talk about it in future classes. But for right now, I just want you to think of the number 6. The number 6 represents the 6 directions, top, bottom, north, south, east, west. Now, we spoke about this just recently. When you bring together the 6 directions to touch each other, you're going to have 12 different corner angles. You have the top horizontal 4 corner angles, which is where the top touches the 4 directions, north, east, west, and south. You have the 4 horizontal bottom corner angles, which is where the bottom touches north, east, south, and west. Then you have the 4 vertical corner angles, which is northeast, southeast, southwest, northwest. Which means that when you're going to draw, when the river, the 6 male emanations, is absorbed by Malchut and then given down to Bria, you're going to think number 12, because that's how it's brought down. So when we talk about the number 12, we're talking about the identity of ego and separation of the world of Bria. When we talk about the number 7, we're talking about the source of the godly soul as it exists in the world of Atzilut. That is the 7 branches of the menorah, which are the 7 emanations of Atzilut. Thus you'll find in the holy teachings, Hillel was always lenient, Shammai was always strict. Why? Because Hillel's soul manifested itself in the branch of kindness, that male emanation, emotion emanation, while Shammai was of strictness and strength. Now let's sum it up this way. When we talk about the 12 oxen, what did I tell you we're talking about? Number 12 is the paradigm of separation, of creation something out of nothing. The world of Bria. Why oxen? Why not trees? Why not anything else? He could have done many beautiful things, King Solomon. He has done many beautiful things. Why oxen? For that, I need to take you to the book of Ezekiel. In the book of Ezekiel, he talks about what's called Maisa Markava. He talks about the prophecy of the throne of glory. Now, you should just know, for starters, in the world of Kabbalah and Chassidus, throne represents the king sitting. King, capital K. Now, sitting is less of a revelation of standing. Thus, we now know that the throne of glory, which is the lower revelation, is in the world of Bria. While when we talk about standing, like when we pray Amidah, we're talking about the revelation of the world of Atzilut. So now we know the throne of glory is in the world of Bria. Now I want you to look into that prophecy of Ezekiel. It's the first time we're introduced to animals. He talks about how the throne of glory, he saw faces. The face of the lion, the face of the ox, the face of the eagle. Then, interestingly enough, he says, and upon the throne, I saw that which was as the image of man. What does this mean to us in this lecture? Practically what it means to us is that our animalistic soul, its source is in the world of Bria. Our godly soul, the image of man, made in his likeness, that is upon the throne, which means the world of Atzilut. Okay? That's so far, we're good with that introduction. Okay? We're getting places. Don't worry. Okay. So now let's talk a little bit about the Atzilut and Bria. I told you Atzilut is absolute oneness. What does that mean, absolute oneness? I spoke to you about the 10 emanations. What are the 10 emanations? Emanations are basically vessels into which the infinite light shines. Now, when the vessels are in proper condition, they are absolutely transparent. When the vessels are not in absolute condition, then there is not this concept of transparency, there's an opaqueness. For us, what that's going to mean is the godly soul is absolutely transparent to the infinite light which shines in it. The emanations of Atzilut, the vessels are 100% absolutely transparent. And therefore, even though there's a dualship, there's vessel and there's light. That's not oneness, that's dualism. However, because these vessels are so 100% transparent, we don't have dualism. Rather, they serve as nothing but to allow the light, the infinite light, to shine through. That's why in the world of Kabbalah, Atzilus oneness is represented by the number 10. when there's really 11. There's 10 vessels and a light. But we don't count it as 11 because the vessels are 100% transparent to the light. When we count the 10 vessels, the light within them is included. Within the human experience, that's our godly soul. Our godly soul is completely transparent to the will of God. Its paradigm is the intellect of God. Its emotions is the feelings of God. Its garments of thought, speech, and action all manifest nothing more than total transparency to God. Parenthetically speaking, that's why the Talmud tells us that there is no greater source of Jewish law than Maiserav, the absolute, actual action. So we'll have a whole Talmudic discussion, questions, answers, verses. How can you say this? How can you say that? And then at the end, one will say, I saw Rabbi Yossi do this and this. That's it. Close discussion. Why? Because Rabbi Yossi, just an example, Rabbi Yossi was, a sage in the Talmud, was absolute transparency. If he did this, we know that this is the will of God. He would not have acted on anything less than absolute certainty that this is the will of God. That's the experience of the godly soul. The godly soul doesn't struggle with sin. It doesn't have temptations. When we talk about the world of Bria, which is the consciousness of ego, of separation, that within the human being represents what? The animalistic soul. The animalistic soul carries within it an opaqueness and is not transparent to the infinite light that shines within it. Okay? So, let's sum it up. What do we understand from this introduction so far? Number one, we understand that the number 12 is the paradigm and consciousness of separation and ego, the world of Bria. And we mentioned that what comes from there, that's the source of the animalistic soul. We know that Atzilus is absolute oneness, God conscience, absolute transparency, and that is the source of the godly soul. Okay? Then we discussed about what? We're going to talk about one more thing here before we move on to the next introduction. The Mechilta. It's a famous medrash. The Mechilta tells us that when the Jewish people left Egypt and there was a splitting of the Sea of Reeds, it split into 12 canals. Not like Universal Studios has it with one split. And that split of 12 canals was one for each tribe. However, Isaiah tells us in the verse that in the final redemption, this river will split into 7 streams. 7, 12. Why? Now we know why. What we were empowered to do in the exodus of Egypt by the splitting of the sea is to elevate and connect our animalistic soul to its source. What's its source? The 10th emanation of Atzilut, which is Malchut. Thus, the splitting of the 12 is helping us break through that roof which separates the world of Bria from the world of Atzilut. Thus, the 12 lines of the animalistic soul can now connect, be elevated, refined to its source, which is Malchut of Atzilut. When Mashiach comes, we're going to be elevated to a much greater heights. We'll be empowered by the splitting of the river of the 7 streams to go ahead and refine and elevate and connect our godly soul, which comes from the 7 branches of the menorah, the 7 emotional emanations of Atzilut, to the supernal crown, the supernal wisdom, which is its source. So much so, we're going to soon see that we reach into the essence of the crown, which is called Atika Kadisha, the ancient holy one. We'll talk about that soon. But that's what we understand so far. We're starting to get a clarity with the number 7, the number 12. Remember, the sacrifices were brought by 12 tribes. The menorah was lit, 7 branches. We're now having a clear understanding of what the difference between what Aaron did and what the 12 princes did. Okay? Let's move further. Last introduction, the sun and the moon. So I want to share with you that there is a paradox within the verse that talks about God creating the sun and the moon. The verse starts by saying, and God made the two great luminaries. And then right there, the verse continues and says, the great luminary to rule over the day, and the lesser luminary to rule over the night. Where do you get a greater and a lesser? The verse just started by saying, God created two great luminaries, which means two equally great luminaries. What all of a sudden happened here? It's not the next verse. In the same verse, boom. So to understand this, we need to understand a little bit Kabbalah of what the sun and the moon represent. In Kabbalah, we have one teaching that says that the sun represents, they both represent the names of God. They bring light into the world. That's the concept of the names of God, bringing God's light into the world. So the sun represents the ineffable tetragrammaton. You people know it, spelled out as Adonai. That's not the way it's truly spelled. That's a different name. It's truly spelled something like YHWH, which is incorrect. But those are the Hebrew letters, Yud, He, Vav, He. That represents the sun. The moon represents God's name of Elohim. Elohim. I'm purposely pronouncing it with a K because I'm not allowed to say God's name. Okay? Now, originally, the job of Elohim, which is the name of vessels, was housing the name of Yud-K, Vav-K, the ineffable tetragrammaton, which is the light. And because originally the creation was that Elohim had 100% absolute transparency to the light, the tetragrammaton, therefore it says two great luminaries. They were both equal. However, in that verse, the minute God created the two great luminaries began the source of sin. The source of sin means, as we explained earlier, that the vessel is picking up an opaqueness. It's no more fully transparent. And thus, what do we have now? Now we have a great luminary and a lesser luminary. Elohim is lesser than the tetragrammaton. The moon became lesser than the sun. Okay? By the way, just putting things together for you momentarily, when we talk about God, the soul, the godly soul, we talk about the creation of the sun, the tetragrammaton, infinite light. When we talk about the body and the animalistic soul, we're talking about the creation of Elohim, vessels, moon, lesser light, lacking transparency. Now please understand that exactly the same thing happened to the human race. Originally, Adam and Eve, their body, which was handcrafted by God, was absolutely transparent to the soul. It was only once Adam and Eve sinned and they ate from the forbidden fruit, from the tree of knowledge, that all of a sudden the body was not transparent and had an opaqueness. The outcome of which that all offspring from Adam and Eve now have a double struggle. On a universal level, they're struggling with the concealment of Elohim upon the light of the ineffable tetragrammaton. On an individual level, we're struggling with the concealment of the body and the animalistic soul upon the godly soul. Okay? Now, why was it so? So we just have to have one last piece, and then we're going to go and sew all these patches together. The reason why it was so is because of a very interesting verse. The verse, the Medrash tells us, our sages teach us, that there's a verse, and you remember it because Abraham gave his wife Sarah a little mussar there. Why? Because she laughed. She laughed when God told her she was going to have a son. Put the story aside, and I want you just to focus on that verse. Tzchoik oseli Elokim. Tzchoik means pleasure. It means laughter. Oseli Elokim, Elokim made for me. Now, to understand this, we need to understand, why did God allow for Elokim to become opaque? Why? Why allow for the origin of sin? The spiritual origin of sin is what happened on Wednesday between the sun and the moon. That's what made possible later on the sixth day, that man and woman should eat from the forbidden tree, the forbidden fruit of the tree of knowledge. And the answer is because only through the concealment of Elokim, only through that separation identity, was man given the opportunity of the most precious service to God, to be able to elevate and refine and overcome temptation. Thus, the notion of God's divine pleasure, which is the essence of the supernal crown, was made available to us not by the ineffable tetragrammaton, because the ineffable tetragrammaton begins with the 10 emanations. What allowed us to connect with an unprecedented divine light was the fact that we now have temptation. It's only because of the descent of the moon, the name Elohim, that man can have ego, man can have temptation, man can have separation, which offers me to create pleasure for God. God has no pleasure from the tetragrammaton. It is as it was made to be. But when you have the descent, when you're creating separation, you're creating freedom of choice. Now for man to overcome this concealment, to freely choose to work on having a relationship with God, that connects to divine pleasure, which is the essence light of the supernal crown. Thus we now understand what Sarah said. Tzchoik, who connected me with the opportunity to give pleasure to God, to draw this great revelation of the holy supernal crown, God's essence, pleasure, that only became possible through the descent of Elokim. Tzchoik, oseli Elokim. Now watch what happens in Kabbalah. In Kabbalah, we're going to now connect the word. It says God made two great luminaries. It says that Elokim made laughter for Sarah. We connect the word made and made, and we understand that what Sarah accomplished by overcoming concealment and separation was bringing even greater light, the supernal crown, essence, pleasure of God, into his names, and through that into our universe. Why am I talking to you about this? Because watch the next thing the sages do. Our Torah begins with saying, our Torah portion begins with saying that God commanded Aaron to kindle the menorahs. We'll soon talk about the exact thing. You know what it says right after that, the conclusion of the verse? And Aaron did so. Vayas, the same terminology. Thus we're going to understand that there's something so deep in kindling the menorahs. Talk again what I said to you about when Mashiach's going to split the river. What's he going to do when he splits the river into 7 streams? What he's going to do is he's going to take that branch, the 7 branches of the menorah, as the godly soul exists within Atzilut, and he's going to connect it to Vayas. He's going to connect it to the ultimate revelation of the presence of pleasure of God. When you connect with pleasure of God, you've reached unprecedented connection and revelation of God. Okay? So, with all that said, we can now bring all these introductions together, and with that, have a very practical, I know I'm throwing mysticism at you, but that's why I shared, get the notes and read it. But what you're going to see as we put all these pieces together is such a beautiful, practical approach of these 2 business secrets. Work on your business, not in your business. And success depends upon connecting with higher intelligence, creative imagination. Let's get to work. Okay. So, our Torah portion begins with the commandment. And God spoke to Moses and told Moses, say to Aaron, when he kindles the lamps. So our sages want to know, why are we starting with this? How did this get into the picture here? This is just a daily event. Why all of a sudden now? We're in the middle of talking about the inauguration, yada yada, why? So our sages tell us it's in direct connection to the end of last week's Torah portion. What was the end of last week's Torah portion? That the 12 princes of the tribes of Israel each brought for their tribes sacrifices, a multitude of sacrifices, upon the altar as an inauguration on behalf of their tribe to the holy temple. So we're taught that when Aaron saw this, Chol Shadaitoi, he became crestfallen, he became distressed. How come I cannot be part of the inauguration on behalf of my tribe? By the way, quickly just to understand, Jacob had 12 sons. There's only 12 tribes. But there's two ways of counting the 12 tribes. You either count his sons and Levi is in, or on a situation like this, Levi is out and we only have 11. But you remember what Joseph did? Remember what Jacob did with Joseph's kids? He said, they shall be to me as my sons. So whenever we don't count Levi, we take Joseph and we split him into two, Ephraim and Manasseh. So the 12 princes was not included in the tribe of Levi. Now it makes sense. Aaron was, whoa, what's about my tribe? How come we're not part of this inauguration? God immediately, when he saw that Aaron became distressed and crestfallen, he said to Moses, tell Aaron to light the menorah, kindle the menorah. And then our sages say these words. God said to Aaron, Shelecha gadol mishalehem. Yours, i.e., kindling the menorah, is greater than theirs, i.e., sacrifices upon the altar. Now, I want to tell you, when I was a kid, and I was taught this Rashi, our teacher gave us the most simple explanation. When the temple was destroyed, the holy temple was destroyed, no more sacrifices. However, thanks to Hanukkah, Jews light the menorah, the Hanukkah menorah, even when they're in exile. That's how one of my teachers told me what it means on a practical level. Shelecha gadol mishalehem. Kindling the menorah of Aaron is greater than, it's eternal. It's greater than the sacrifices of the other princes of the tribes. Kabbalah and Hasidus get to the heart of these two services. Kindling the menorah and sacrifices on the altar. By getting to the heart of it, we'll truly understand what God is saying. Yours, kindling the menorah, is greater than theirs, sacrifices on the altar. Okay? Let's see. Let's get to it. Excuse me. So, number one. If you look into the verses, it clearly tells us that the 12 princes of the tribes of Israel, they brought the sacrifices to the holy temple. They brought the sacrifices to the tabernacle, to the altar, and after that it says that God accepted it and told Moses one per day. So where did this concept come from? It didn't come from above to below. It came from below to above. They aroused within themselves, hey, we should do something here. They brought it to God, and God accepted it. When it comes to the kindling of the menorah, it didn't come from Aaron. It came from God. God commanded it. The arousal came from above. This is the difference between man-made and God-made. Arousal from below or arousal from above. Now I want to share with you that this difference between whether it was their idea versus it being God's idea really manifests all the differences we're about to discuss between the two services. Kindling the menorah and bringing sacrifices on the altar. Let's go through it. Number one, sacrifices is taking an animal as it is. You bring it onto the outer altar, which was in the courtyard, not in the temple. And there, we placed it on the fire on the altar in the courtyard. What does that mean? Let's play back with some introductions. The courtyard is the realm of separation, the world of Bria. The holy temple itself is Atzilut, oneness. So A, we took the animal as is. B, we only elevated it to where? To the world of Bria, separation. And over there, what do we do with it? We drew fire. What does fire represent? For the candle of God is the soul of man. The godly soul, as it descends into the world of separation, consumes and elevates the animal. Let's look at what happens with kindling the menorah. Number one, for kindling the menorah, we're taught in Exodus, the verse clearly says, you can only use pure olive oil crushed for the menorah. The sages say, what do you mean crushed for the menorah? What I have to have in mind, I'm crushing this oil for the menorah? So Rashi to the rescue. He says, number one, you can only use pure olive oil, which means that you can only crush it by the stone. You can't use the mill, because when you crush olives with the mill, some of the sediments get in. That's not pure. Number two, he says, you can only use the first press. The second press can only be used for sacrifices, the flour offerings. That means we don't accept the animal as is. It has to be refined and pure. A. B. Where was the menorah kindled? Where was the menorah standing? Not in the courtyard, inside. Thus, number three, kindling the menorah represents Aaron bringing on the 7 branches of the godly soul as they are in the world of Atzilut and elevation. Thus we see the difference in the man-made and the God-made. The man-made of sacrifices is the animal in the courtyard being consumed and refined by the godly soul only as she descends into the world of separation. Kindling the menorah is only of the finest and purest olive oil, i.e. the godly soul, and it's kindled in the holy temple, and it represents the godly soul being elevated, the 7 branches of the 7 emotions in Atzilut being elevated and brought up to oil. You know what oil represents? In Kabbalah, oil represents the supernal wisdom. Even higher than that, into the supernal crown, the supernal will. Thus the difference between the man-made and the God-made. Okay? Let's go further. Now we understand what the verse in this week's Torah portion tells us. Let me read it to you. It says, God told Moses to tell Aaron, when you light the lamps, the 7 lamps shall cast their light toward the face of the menorah. Mul pinei menorah. Menorah doesn't have a face. What does it mean? The word face in Hebrew, panim, means interior, pnimiut. What is God telling Aaron? Aaron, my boy, what I want you to do is not to elevate the animalistic soul. I want you to elevate the godly soul. From the expressive 7 branches to the inner essence of Malchut. Not the way Malchut descends and separates, but the inner essence of Malchut. Now, Malchut is kingship. What's upon the head of the kingship? The crown. Which means that through the elevation of the supernal wisdom, the oil of supernal wisdom, that Aaron draws onto the 7 branches, he connects the souls into their inner essence of Malchut, the face of the menorah, which then brings it straight up into the crown, the pleasure of God, which is Atika Kadisha, the ancient Holy One. What the princes were doing was they were only elevating the animalistic soul up to its source in the 10th emanation of Atzilut. What Aaron was doing, yours is greater than theirs, because you're elevating the godly soul into unprecedented light. You're taking them into the crown, beyond the tetragrammaton. You're taking them into the inner dimension of the crown. Therefore, yours is greater than theirs. There's one more point before we close up the lecture. You remember what I shared with you about the sun and the moon? I shared with you that the moon went through a descent. Why was there a descent? Right? The moon, which was originally equal to the great luminary, now became the lesser luminary. And I shared with you why. I told you the Kabbalistic ruling, Yerida Tzorech Aliyah. The only reason there's ever a descent in God's universe is for the purpose of ascent. And I shared with you that only because of the opaqueness of Elohim, which didn't allow for a transparency to the divine light of the tetragrammaton, there became the realm of separation. Separation creates ego. Ego allows for me to work on refinement, freedom of will, elevation. That connects us to the pleasure of God. God has pleasure, not from the system, the automated system. He has pleasure from freedom of choice, choosing to overcome the nature of ego-centric self to connect to Him. Now, if that's what connects us to the highest level, my friends, we have a problem. The whole thing of Aaron came from above to below. Elohim is all about from below to above. Refinement, elevation. Deal with the animalistic soul. That's what creates pleasure. That the godly soul is a good boy. Whoop-de-doo. Make a mensch out of the animal. Oh, now we're causing pleasure. Now we're creating a novelty, a phenomenon. Thus is the problem. How can you tell me Shelacha Gadol Mishalahem that Aaron's work, service, was greater than the service of mankind? How can you tell me that? Thus we're going to introduce one last concept. But before I do that, I want to start bringing this together for you. You understand that the work of Aaron kindling the menorah, the work of elevation that God made, is what we call working on your business of self. When you're dealing with the wild passion and characteristics of the animal soul, you're working within the business of self. When you're doing the elevation of the godly soul from above, you're dealing with the entrepreneur who's bringing a profit of light, God's pleasure, the ancient one, the supernal crown. That's called working on your business. When you're making a mensch out of your bad traits, the animalistic passions and undesirable characteristic traits of the animalistic soul, driven by egocentrism, at that point you're working in the business, not on the business. So if we're saying that Aaron is all about working on the business, the entrepreneur bringing unprecedented wealth of infinite light into the universe, whoa. We just said that it's only through the descent of Elohim. But Aaron is all about being commanded from above, not aroused from below. And what is his job? To bring the supernal oil of wisdom upon the 7 branches, the emotions of the soul, godly soul. Whoa. Where's pleasure? That all makes sense. The godly soul was born to serve. There is no breaking of the spirit of the animal. Thus, now we're going to talk about what we said earlier. God didn't command Aaron to light the menorah until what? Until Aaron was crestfallen. He was distressed. Why am I and my tribe not connected to God? Why aren't we able to do the service of God, of an inauguration of His holy temple upon planet Earth? This being distressed from experiencing separation. This is what we're talking about when we talk about the work of Elohim. However, let me explain. What is the ultimate refinement of Elohim? To understand that, I want to take you to a piece of Talmud in Brachot, page 40, side A. He says over there like this: Kli rek machrekon machzik, kli mole eno machzik. An empty vessel holds. A full vessel doesn't hold. That is the ultimate experience of refinement. Let's talk about this. What did the creation do? What did this whole concept of consciousness of separation and self and ego do? What it did was it filled my cup. It filled me with ego of self. When I'm filled with ego of self, I can't hold God's divine pleasure. I'm interested in my pleasure. Thus, what is the ultimate job of the working Elohim concealment? The ultimate job of working the Elohim concealment is not about making a mensch out of my animalistic soul. That's working with the ego, with the self. Oh, a nice ego. But it's still ego. I want to be a good person. But that's I. That starts with a capital I. The ultimate experience of working the concealment of Elohim is when I can let go of self. I can completely step out of self. When I step out of self, I let go. I'm not even worried about self-perfection. I'm just yearning. I'm crestfallen. I am distressed on the fact that I'm separated from God. That I cannot fully serve God. That is the ultimate emptying out of the vessel. That is the ultimate connection to the Elohim concealment, which takes us directly into the kindling of menorah. Now becomes the manifestation of divine pleasure. This is the ultimate experience. Okay. So, now we can really understand what it means yours is greater than theirs. You know why we can understand why yours is greater than theirs? I'm not talking about just the outcome product. The very work of overcoming self is not about self-perfection. It's not about the ego. So many of us get caught in this self-knowledge, self-perfection, through self-discipline. That's all still self. That's all I said. Self. So even when I tell you I'm not a good person, I want to be a better person. Did you hear the main noun in that sentence? I. Thus, in that situation, that's not the ultimate experience. Yes, that'll lead to pleasure, but in itself is full. When you're full of self, you can't be open to receive higher intelligence. Thus, you're not connected with creative imagination. Only by being able to stop working on self-perfection, to let go of self. Let me just serve God. So I'm not perfect. So I'm not disciplined. But right now, I can do what God wants me to do. I can help someone else. That's when even the experience of Elohim becomes all about the supernal divine pleasure of God. That's when even working self-refinement, letting go of self, is connecting to the higher intelligence and opening us up to creative imagination. In closing, my friend, there's a huge difference between working in our primary business of self and working on our primary business of self. Life's mission, please hear me, because I am struggling with this, and I just want to share that with you. Life's mission is not self-perfection. Life's mission is actually to let go of self and become a conduit for God's infinite light. Now, I didn't put this in my notes, and I'm shooting it off the cuff. One of the amazing things, if you ever watched the movie of Amadeus, it seems to be that, oh, please help me out. What was the name of his? Salieri. It seems to be that Salieri was a much finer, self-disciplined person than Mozart. But Mozart was able to get self out of way. He didn't take himself seriously. Salieri took himself seriously. Ultimately speaking, working on the business of self only happens when you stop taking yourself seriously and you open yourself up to connect with the divine pleasure of God and the infinite entire intelligence of God. When I'm not about being the best that I can be, rather about God shine through me. Now we're working on the business. When we're busy making a mensch out of ourselves, I want to be perfect. I want to be better. I want to be self-disciplined. I. We're working in the business. When we're dealing with our animalistic soul, we're working in the business. When I can stop looking in the mirror to see whether I gained a couple of muscles, whether I'm developing my six-pack, my spiritual six-pack of self-control and self-discipline, that is when I let go of working in the business, and now I'm working on the business. I want great profits of unprecedented infinite light. By doing this, my friends, we open ourselves up to connecting with higher intelligence and experiencing creative imaginations in every area of our life. And from there, we can then bring it into our financial lives as well. Thank you, my friends.